Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're diving into something that's, well, fundamentally changing how we read and trust information online. It's about the authority that AI-generated text seems to have. Stop and think about it for a second. When you read something from an AI, it's usually flawless, grammatically perfect, and it sounds utterly sure of itself. Completely different from how people communicate, right? We
Mhm.
hesitate, we use filler words, maybe say, I think, or perhaps. AI text just doesn't do that. It's
Uh,
got this weird, unwavering confidence, and that feeling, that aura of competence, it kind of bypasses our critical thinking. So the big question is, when digital text always sounds certain, what's that actually doing to our ability to tell truth from fiction?
That's exactly the heart of it. Yeah, this whole deep dive is really looking into that inherent authority and maybe the danger that comes with this super confident AI text. We're digging into how that smoothness, that perfect grammar gets mistaken for actual, verifiable truth. It's about the psychology, really. Why do we trust it so easily?
Okay, right. Let's unpack that.
Yep.
So, our mission today is to get under the hood of why AI text feels so authoritative. But maybe more importantly, how tiny little errors, things you might barely notice, become a massive systemic risk when they're blasted out at scale. It's about information integrity, really. Let's kick off right there. The immediate difference you feel reading AI versus human writing. If I'm talking to you, like now you're probably picking up on subtle cues, right? My tone, maybe a slight pause.
Signals.
Yeah, signals. Signals that maybe I'm not 100% certain or I'm choosing my words carefully. We're kind of wired to read those signals as honesty, or at least like an admission that we don't know everything.
And that wiring, it's getting totally short-circuited by the AI output we see now. Because when the text comes from a model, well, those human cues just vanish. They aren't there. These models, they're trained to find the most statistically plausible next word. That means the output is optimized for, like, fluency above all else. So what you get is text that's perfectly clean, grammatically spot on, delivered with this machine-like certainty. It never seems to doubt itself, never trips up. It hits all the markers for expertise, even if the information it's based on is shaky or, completely made up.
Yeah, and something that really jumped out from the analysis was the effect of that difference. A human expert, even a really confident one, still has to qualify things sometimes. We say stuff like, well, in my view, or based on the current data. But the AI, it just sounds sure all the time.
That's precisely what creates this false aura of authority.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker, the thing that really matters for you, the reader. Once you accept that authority, just because the text sounds so flawless, that critical step, the double shipping, it often just stops.
Yeah.
Why would you check something that sounds like it came straight from, I don't know, an encyclopedia?
Yeah, and
Your
again,
brain kind of accepts it because there wasn't even a hint of doubt.
Okay, but let me push back a little here. What about really polished human writing? Like a perfectly edited book or a major newspaper article, that also presents itself very confidently without the ums and ahs. So why is AI text different? Why is it uniquely dangerous compared to, say, centuries of confident human writing?
Good question. It comes down to the next piece of the puzzle, scale.
yeah,
Unbelievable scale.
Yeah.
Traditional publishing, even online, has gatekeepers, right? Editors, fact checkers, even just the physical limits of how much one person or team can produce. An error in a book might be influential, but it's contained. AI scales that confidence infinitely. There are basically no guardrails on volume.
Right, okay. That brings us to the core issue then. It's bad enough we might trust one piece of text too easily. But now we're shifting focus from that single instance to just how far and wide this stuff spreads.
This is where it gets genuinely quite alarming. Think about a typical human mistake. If I mess up a date, say, tell you the Battle of Hastings was 1067 instead of 1066, that error is kind of limited, isn't it? Limited by who I talk to.
And it often gets garbled in retelling.
Exactly. Like the game of telephone or Chinese whispers, the message gets fuzzy, less credible over time.
But with generative AI, that whole dynamic just flips on its head. This is the mechanism of mass error propagation we're seeing. A claim that sounds plausible but is actually wrong, a plausibly false fact, let's call it, can be generated, well, not just once, it can be generated millions of times every single day. And each version is slightly tailored, maybe for different queries, different audiences, but they all subtly reinforce that same wrong idea. The analysis we looked at had a great line. It's like Chinese whispers on steroids.
On steroids, yeah. But actually, it's worse than that. Because it's not one chain where the message degrades. It's like billions of parallel chains all pumping out the error in pristine, perfectly formed text simultaneously.
Okay, that point needs underlining. It's kind of terrifying when you think about it. The error doesn't degrade. It gets regenerated, perfectly formatted every single time. So that initial slip up, maybe a tiny misstatement about a financial rule, or getting a historical detail slightly wrong keeps its perfect grammar, its authoritative tone, across millions and millions of outputs. It shows up in chatbots, summaries, maybe even draft emails.
And it doesn't fuzz out. It actually solidifies. It becomes more established because it appears everywhere, looking perfect each time.
Precisely. And then you get this reinforcement loop, which really locks the error in. It's not just spreading socially, like people sharing a dodgy article. It's algorithmic.
Algorithmic how?
Well, these confidently wrong snippets get picked up by search engines. They get used in automated summaries. They can even end up back in the training data for the next generation of models. The system starts to teach itself the error.
Yeah, the error gets reinforced because the vehicle carrying it, the language, looks so perfect.
Yeah.
It sails past the usual red flags.
Okay, let's talk about the type of errors. The analysis makes a really strong point here. The biggest danger isn't necessarily one massive, obvious lie that you could easily debunk. It's more like a million tiny confident slips everywhere, constantly. And the examples given are things like maybe an invented reference that looks totally legit but goes nowhere, or attaching the wrong name to a well-known quote, or getting a statistic about, say, climate change just slightly wrong, but repeating that slightly wrong version over and over. Individually, if you saw one of those on a website, you might just shrug it off or fix it. They seem pretty harmless on their own, so why the big concern? Why should we actually fear these tiny slips?
Because the cumulative effect fundamentally changes the ground beneath our feet, the information landscape we all navigate. Think about that analogy using the source materials. It's really powerful. Imagine if just 1% of the bricks in every building across an entire city were subtly misaligned, just a tiny bit off.
Yeah.
At first, you wouldn't notice. The buildings would look fine, structurally sound, but over time, with that tiny error replicated everywhere, the whole city would start to warp. Walls would lean, foundations would shift. The entire place becomes unreliable, skewed.
That's a really stark image for what could happen to knowledge. If we stop questioning the small details because the language model sounds so sure, then entire fields of knowledge could slowly drift off course.
Absolutely. Think about history. Slightly misremembered events, repeated confidently and constantly by AI summaries, could gradually become the accepted version just because they show up everywhere.
Or science.
Science, yeah. Minor errors in explaining equations or misattributing findings. If those propagate through enough student essays, online explanations, maybe even draft textbooks generated by AI, common understanding starts to drift. And maybe most worryingly, politics. Subtle biases in framing just a slight shift in the words used to describe a policy, or constantly using a positive adjective for one side and a negative one for the other when delivered at this scale. It can absolutely shift public perception of what's normal, what's true, what's acceptable.
These aren't big propaganda posters. They're like constant tiny nudges.
Exactly. Consistent, confident nudges that slowly warp reality without setting off major alarms.
So what does that do to trust? When people eventually start noticing these cracks, when they realize they've been consistently fed slightly wrong information, even small stuff, by sources that sounded totally authoritative. The analysis pointed to a really dangerous swing, didn't it? People might flip from just blindly trusting whatever the AI says
to suddenly trusting nothing. Total cynicism about all information sources, digital or otherwise.
And both extremes are bad, right? Blind trust is dangerous, but so is complete rejection of any shared information. That's corrosive for society, for democracy.
Which leads us to, okay, what do we do? What kind of foresight do we need? And the key insight seems to be, don't just worry about the AI telling a giant lie. The real foresight is recognizing that one misaligned brick, that single, tiny, confident error as a warning sign, a sign that the whole information structure might be drifting off kilter. Our old ways of checking facts, research, expert review, careful editing, they just can't keep up. They can't scale to fight errors being generated and regenerated millions, maybe billions of times a day. Think about it. The cost of creating plausible text is basically zero now, but the cost of verifying it still really high.
So, okay, we need solutions that match the scale of this thing. The analysis talks about scaling skepticism, making verification frictionless, and encoding humility into the machines. Let's break those down. What does frictionless verification even look like? Is that technically feasible?
Well, it needs to become standard, not an extra step. Right now, if you want to verify something an AI tells you, you have to actively stop, open another tab, search. It takes effort. Friction.
Right.
Frictionless verification could mean things like the source, the actual provenance of the information, is embedded directly in the AI's output, maybe unbreakably linked. Or perhaps every statement comes with a little confidence score generated by the model itself, like a traffic light, showing how sure it is based on its data.
Okay, that connects to the encoded humility idea, which sounds almost counterintuitive, like asking the AI to be deliberately less persuasive, or at least to admit when it's just making a plausible guess. Isn't the goal of the model to be helpful and sound knowledgeable?
It might counteract its current goal, which is often just maximum fluency and helpfulness theater. We need to shift that goal. Encoding humility isn't just about adding phrases like, I think. That can be faked. It means forcing the model under the hood to assess its own confidence based on how good its source data is for that specific query. If it's asked for a common fact, high confidence, fine. But if it's asked about something obscure or very recent, it must signal that low confidence. Maybe by using cautious language automatically or explicitly stating, my data on this is limited, please verify with primary sources. It's about acknowledging that just because something sounds right doesn't mean it is right. Plausibility isn't truth.
So, what's the takeaway for us right now as people reading and using this stuff every day? It sounds like we need a fundamental shift in how we react. We have to stop automatically equating that polished, perfect, confident style with reliability. The real danger we've been discussing isn't just one bad chatbot, it's systemic. It's this combination of massive scale and that inherent machine confidence, quietly nudging our shared understanding of reality all the time. We almost need to become more suspicious of text that looks too perfect.
Yes, exactly. The big risk isn't the AI creating some huge, obvious falsehood that gets debunked immediately. It's far more subtle. It's reality getting nudged, just a fraction off axis, through millions of tiny, confident errors. A wrong date here, a misattributed quote there, a slightly biased description repeated over and over until, maybe gradually, the cumulative effect means the ground we thought we were standing on isn't quite where we thought it was. So the question you need to keep asking ourselves is, if the very foundation of information is shifting subtly, without us always realizing it, how do we even know where we truly stand right now? Keep your critical thinking sharp. That polished plausibility. It can be the most convincing and therefore the most dangerous kind of falsehood out there.